So I would like to go through a MIDI implementation chart with you today, and I'm going to go through each of the sections and talk about what they mean and what they specifically mean for our instrument. Here we go. So at the top we have here Model Volca Bass MIDI implementation chart, the date that this was created, what version it's for. This is all still accurate. A MIDI implementation chart is a standard document that you should be able to get for any of your instruments that use MIDI. So if you understand how one of them works, you will pretty much get all of them. So across the top, it'll tell us what that function is, if it sends that information, if it can receive that information, and any specific things that we should know about it. So in this first category, basic channel, default, or changed, we can set our machine to receive on channels 1 through 16. We can also change that to any of the other channels that we want, and it will remember. So this merely tells us that we can work on all 16 MIDI channels. And whichever one we choose, it will remember. You'll notice on the left, as you go through this chart, this instrument sends no MIDI. So unless you've done some sort of mod, there's no MIDI out on the Korg. And so everything in the transmitted channel is going to be null. So we'll only be talking about information that it can receive, okay? Or that we can set. So we can set the MIDI channel to 1 through 16. Okay, next we have mode. And mode refers to actually a small chart at the bottom. Here we go. We're zooming all the way to the bottom here. And you'll see here mode 1, omni on poly, mode 2, omni on mono. And what this means is, does it receive on all channels at once, or can it receive on only one channel? So omni on means that a device can receive on all channels simultaneously. This instrument cannot do that. Or can it receive poly, meaning can it receive more than one MIDI note at a time? Or is it mono? It can only receive one MIDI note at a time. Our instrument is mode 3, omni off, so it can only receive on one channel, and poly, which means it can receive multiple notes at the same time. However, the Korg bass is a mono instrument, so it's only going to play one note at a time. You can detune the oscillators, but you can't play two pitches and have it play paraphonically, where it suddenly splits the next key press to a different pitch. It will not let oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 have separate pitches sent to them. So even though it says poly, we're only going to be able to play one note at a time on our bass. Let's move on. It does not receive mode messages. Okay, note number. This just refers to what notes can it play, and it plays the full range of 128 MIDI notes. You'll see over here the little asterisk 1. Of course, if we go down to the bottom of the page, here's another explanation. Asterisk 1. Received when global parameter MIDI receives short messages set to on. So if for some reason you set this to off, then you can't actually send any MIDI notes to your instrument. So you got to make sure that MIDI short message is turned on, and we will talk about that when we get to the video where we actually have the instrument out. By the way, the MIDI note numbers, they refer to actual specific pitches. So for example, the lowest A on a standard 88 key piano is MIDI note 21. The highest C on an 88 key piano is MIDI 108. In the middle C, the one that every little student learns to call middle C, is MIDI note 60. Okay, moving on. Velocity. The instrument will receive velocity. The little touch-sensitive keys on the instrument itself don't send velocity information. But if you hook up a MIDI instrument that does transmit velocity information, then it will receive the full range of velocity that it can. And 9N just refers to the note on MIDI message. Aftertouch, unfortunately no. So if you have a keyboard that sends aftertouch when you press harder on a key after you've already hit it, it will not do anything to the bass. It does receive pitch bend messages, so you've got your pitch wheel on any synthesizer keyboard. and this will also work on the bass. Now we have the control changes that your instrument can receive. So, receiving on control change 5 is the portamento time, and this one is actually really important. The instrument defaults to some amount of portamento time. So if you hold down one key and then press another, it takes a moment to reach that pitch. It's just like the glide time on your Crave. You can only change that time by connecting a MIDI instrument or keyboard or controller that you can set to control message 5 and change its value. That's what this *3 refers to. *3 is cannot be changed with machine operations, can only be changed with MIDI. So you have to send a message to control change 5 to change the glide time on your Volca bass. Control change 11, this is a way of controlling volume. It will allow you to change the volume over time. Say you plug in an expression pedal, one that allows you to send varying messages as opposed to an on-off sustain pedal. So anything that will send a range of messages to control change 11 will change the expression, or change the volume, sorry. Now, something this could be handy for. You'll notice this does not receive anything on control change 1, which is usually the mod wheel. So if you can map your MIDI controller to change what message is sent from your mod wheel, you could change that to 11. And then you could use your mod wheel as a volume control. Because you'll notice this also does not receive control change 7, which changes volume. And then you can change the octave of the oscillators, LFO rate, LFO intensity, the pitch of each of the 3 oscillators, the envelope attack, the envelope decay, the cutoff intensity, and the gate time. You can change all of those by sending MIDI messages to these values. So you can map your controller to send message 49, and you can change the gate time on your bass, which is very cool. One that you'll notice is not here is the sustain pedal, 64. So if you have a sustain pedal connected to your keyboard, you will not be able to use it to hold out notes on the Volca bass. Next, it does not receive any program change information, which is pretty clear. It doesn't have any presets, so there's nothing there. It can't receive sysx messages. It can receive messages that tell it where to start within its sequence. This *2 means not received when clock source is set to internal. So if you have the clock source set to an external clock, that can tell it to start and stop at a varying spot in its sequence as opposed to simply the beginning. But you can't use it to choose which memory you're on, that's song select, and you can't use it to tune the instrument. System real-time clock means that it can be synced to other instruments, and command means that other instruments can tell it to start and stop its sequencer. Local on-off, this means if you were able to set this to local off, then the small touch-sensitive keys on your instrument could be turned off, which meant you could touch them and no sounds would come out. You can't do that. So those little keys will always play a note. If you can send a message 123 to 127, these are the notes off message. So if for some reason a MIDI note gets stuck sounding and doesn't turn off, which happens sometimes with MIDI, it will receive an all notes off, sometimes called panic message. Active sense means that it receives messages letting it know that it's still connected to MIDI via something else. So if you have a keyboard that sends out a continual active sense message to say, yes, I'm still connected, the Volca bass can receive those messages. This usually isn't something you have to think about very often. And this little reset refers to, I could send it a message that sends everything back to the state it was in when it was powered on. So a very powerful message, and the Volca Bass will not receive it. All right, and that is the entirety of a MIDI implementation chart. So whenever you need to know how MIDI works on your instrument, you might want to Google this and see if you can find out what you need to know.